Before the Battle of Marathon became legend, before the thunder of bronze on wicker shields shook the plain, the world seemed already spoken for. By the dawn of the 5th century BC, the Achaemenid Persian Empire was the unquestioned titan of its age. It stretched from the banks of the Nile to the mountains of Pakistan, from the windswept plains of Central Asia to the rich valleys of Anatolia. No empire had ever grown so vast, so swiftly, with such precision. Kings, tribes, and nations across 3 continents paid tribute to a single monarch, Darius I. Under his rule, roads were paved, satrapies organized, armies mobilized with clockwork efficiency. The empire swallowed lands the way fire swallows dry grass. Conquest was not merely an ambition, it was the equilibrium of Persia. Expansion was expected, resistance was unthinkable. And yet, in a rocky peninsula at the edge of the known world, something strange stirred. A tiny, quarrelsome cluster of city-states, Greece, defied Persia's shadow. They were not united, they were not mighty, they did not command legions or empires, but they were proud, independent, and stubborn. And one of them, Athens, had dared to support a revolt inside the Persian Empire itself. For Darius, it was not a matter of necessity, it was a matter of punishment. He demanded earth and water, symbols of submission from every Greek city. Some complied, some hesitated. Athens refused. The consequence would become one of the most defining battles in human history. In the summer of 490 BC, the Aegean Sea churned beneath the darkest fleet Greece had ever witnessed. 600 Persian ships, triremes and transports, cutting across the waves in a vast crescent. On board, 25,000 soldiers, archers, spearmen, infantry from every corner of the empire. Elite units hardened by decades of campaigns in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The mission was simple: burn Eretria, crush Athens, bring their populations to Persia in chains. The first objective was completed swiftly. Eretria fell after 6 days of betrayal and devastation. Its temples were torched, its citizens were taken. Then the fleet turned south, hugging the coastline, seeking the perfect landing site for the next stage of the invasion. They found it, at a long, flat stretch of land 40 kilometers northeast of Athens, the plain of Marathon. Athens was not ready for a war of annihilation. Its army was small, 10,000 hoplites, citizen soldiers with limited training. They were farmers, shepherds, shipwrights, fishermen, not professionals. And yet they carried with them one of the most effective military systems of the ancient world, the hoplite phalanx. Bronze helmet, bronze cuirass, greaves, shield, spear. Armor weighing over 70 pounds, enough to turn a citizen into a mobile fortress. But equipment alone could not make up the numerical difference. Athens knew it could not stand alone. So they sent a runner, perhaps the most legendary in ancient lore, Philippides, dispatched to Sparta to request aid. He ran 140 miles in 2 days. Sparta agreed, but not immediately. They were in the middle of the Carneia, a festival during which the laws forbade marching to war. The Spartans promised to come, but they would arrive too late. Athens would face the storm by itself. Only one ally answered the call in time: 1,000 Plataeans, a small city-state whose loyalty would echo through history. Together they marched to Marathon, taking position on the high ground overlooking the plain. There they waited, watching the largest invasion force the Greek mainland had ever seen. For 5 long days, the two armies stared at one another across the fields of Marathon. The Persians remained near the coast, close to their ships, confident and patient. Their cavalry, famed across the world, grazed freely on the flatlands, a lethal reminder of the Persian tactical advantage. The Athenians, perched on the slopes of the hills, refused to descend onto terrain that would expose them to cavalry charges. They dug trenches, fortified their position, and watched the enemy. Each night, the Greek camp was tense and silent. The men slept propped against their shields, gripping spears. Across the plain, Persian war drums echoed, rhythmic, steady, unnervingly calm. The Athenians knew what was at stake. If their army died, Athens would burn. Its citizens would become slaves. Greek resistance would collapse. But Miltiades, one of the 10 Athenian generals, saw something others did not. He believed the Persians were waiting for an opportunity to sail around Cape Sunion and strike Athens directly, bypassing the army at Marathon. If the fleet reached the city first, Athens would fall without a fight. And then, at dawn on the 6th day, the moment Miltiades had predicted arrived.
Persian scouts and detachments moved inland. Dust clouds rose near the coast, and then the cavalry was gone. The entire mounted force had reboarded the ships, preparing to sail south. This was the opening Miltiades had been praying for. Without Persian cavalry, the battlefield suddenly tilted toward the Greeks. The hoplite phalanx, slow and heavy, would not be outflanked by horsemen. Their shields could withstand arrows long enough to close the distance. Miltiades called the generals into council. Some hesitated, afraid of descending into the open plain. But Miltiades insisted they must attack now, or Athens would be taken behind their backs. A tie-breaking vote was needed. Callimachus, Polemarch, cast the decisive vote in favor of battle. The decision was made. The Athenians would charge.
On the morning of the battle, the hoplite ranks formed along the slopes. Miltiades deployed them in an unusual formation. Strong wings, a deliberately weakened center. He intended the wings to envelop the Persians once the center drew them in. The Greeks adjusted their helmets, tightened their grips, steadied their breathing. The Persian line shimmered in the distance, stretching across the plain. Archers ready, infantry waiting. The Greeks began to march, shields locked, spears angled, paces synchronized. The sound of 11,000 armored men moving in unison reverberated through the valley, a deep, metallic roar. As they approached the Persian archers' effective range, Miltiades gave a command unlike any issued before. Run! It was madness. It was revolutionary. It was the only way to reach the Persian lines before the arrows tore them apart. And so the hoplites broke into a full sprint, nearly a mile of open terrain. To the Persians, it was astonishing. No Greek army had ever charged like this. Some Persian commanders believed the Greeks had simply panicked, fleeing forward. But the Athenians were not running from death. They were running toward it, because behind them lay their families, their city, their freedom. Arrows began to fall, a whistling storm overhead. Bronze shields thudded with impacts, helmets rang, men staggered but kept running. And then, like a bronze tidal wave, the hoplite phalanx slammed into the Persian infantry with a force that reshaped the course of history. The front ranks crashed together. Wicker shields splintered under bronze spearheads. Persian lines bent under the shock of men who weighed more than their own armor. The Greeks pushed forward with the unstoppable mass of the phalanx. Shield to shield, shoulder to shoulder, a single organism with 22,000 legs and 11,000 hearts. The Persians, used to maneuverable, lightly armored combat, suddenly found themselves pinned, suffocating under the sheer density of the Greek formation. Yet the plan's risk became immediately apparent. The Greek center was collapsing. The Persians, sensing weakness, poured into the breach, forcing the Athenian middle backward. It seemed for a moment that Miltiades had gambled too much. But this retreat was exactly what he intended. On the wings, Athenian and Plataean hoplites surged forward, overwhelming the Persian flanks. The professional troops of the empire, unprepared for the concentrated shock on the wings, broke formation. And then the wings turned inward. What followed was one of the earliest recorded instances of a double envelopment, a maneuver made iconic centuries later at Cannae. The Persians were now surrounded, trapped between two iron arcs of Greek bronze, their lines disintegrated. Chaos engulfed the Persian ranks. Some fled toward the safety of the ships, others attempted to regroup. Many simply threw down their weapons and ran. The Greeks pressed forward relentlessly, driving the enemy across the plain. The marshlands near the coast became a deadly trap. Persians stumbled into the mud, sinking, slipping, drowning under the weight of their gear. Those who reached the ships fought desperately to repel the Greeks. In the melee, the Athenians captured 7 Persian vessels, the first naval trophies of the war. By the battle's end, the field was strewn with bodies. Persian casualties numbered around 6,400. Greek losses, 192 Athenians, 11 Plataeans. It's statistically impossible. Militarily astonishing. Civilizationally decisive. The Greek army had achieved what the world considered unthinkable. But there was no time to celebrate. The Persian cavalry, sailing around Cape Sunion, was en route to Athens. If the city fell, the victory at Marathon would mean nothing. The Greeks needed to return before the Persians arrived. So the hoplites marched, all 40 kilometers, still wearing their armor, still drenched in sweat and blood, many wounded, none resting. It was a march of desperation, determination, and survival. At the same time, a messenger, likely Philippides, ran ahead to warn the city. Exhausted, dehydrated, driven by duty, he reached Athens and delivered a single message: "We are victorious!" Then, according to legend, he collapsed and died. Whether mythic or real, the story reflects the urgency of the moment. When the Persian ships finally rounded the Cape and approached Phaleron Bay, they saw something that shattered their hopes. The Athenian army was already there. Armor glinting, spears raised, shields lined across the shore. The Persians hesitated, evaluated, and after a long pause, turned away. The invasion had failed.
The triumph at Marathon was more than a battlefield victory. It was the first major defeat of Persia by a Greek city-state. It proved that the hoplite system, and more importantly, the morale of free citizens fighting for their homeland, could withstand the might of the greatest empire on earth. In Athens, the fallen were honored with a burial mound on the battlefield, a rare privilege reserved for heroes. The names of the 192 dead were inscribed on marble, not by rank, not by wealth, but alphabetically, a testament to equality in sacrifice. The victory inspired confidence, unity, and a new sense of identity among the Greeks, and it planted the seed of an idea that would echo across the centuries, that a free people defending their land could defy a tyrant. 10 years later, the Persians would return under Xerxes with an army 10 times the size. But the memory of Marathon fueled Greek resolve at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Western civilization, democracy, philosophy, architecture, and much more would emerge from the fire lit on that plain, because a handful of farmers, craftsmen, and citizens had stood their ground against the world's greatest empire, and won. Today, the name Marathon is synonymous with endurance, with the idea that a human being can push beyond what is ordinary and achieve what appears impossible. But when we strip back the myth, the legend, the symbolism, we find something even more profound. A moment when history balanced on a knife's edge. A moment when one small city's courage changed the fate of continents. A moment when ordinary citizens proved that their lives, their families, and their freedom were worth fighting for. The Battle of Marathon was not simply a military event. It was a statement, a declaration that tyranny would not be the destiny of Greece. And from that defiance, the world we know was born.
Enjoying this journey through history? Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a 5-minute dive into the past. Got a historical mystery or epic story you want us to cover next? Drop it in the comments. Your idea could be our next episode on History in 5.